Everybody, you are in for a very special treat. We have with us today Dr. Len Brancwinz. He is a PharmD, MD, ND. It's like alphabet soup. He has so many credentials behind his name. But not only that, he's an amazing clinician, a great friend of mine, an amazing man of God. And today he's going to be talking about pH, acidity, and antimicrobial resistance. So we haven't really had a topic on this, so I'm kind of excited here to hear what you have to say.
And this is one of those subjects, Trace, that, I mean, literally this lecture could go on for 3 or 4 hours. Let me just give you a little background. And one of the slides say this coming up. 9 years ago in July, I was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer. And for somebody who has lived a fairly clean health life, that says I've eaten what I thought was proper, even though I come from an Italian Polish background. But when that hit me, I said, I've got to make a change. And for me to fight that, to be able to say year in and year out that I'm cancer free, I had to come up with a basic concept that says I can eat a lot of different foods, but I have to understand food combining. I have to understand the proper supplementation, and I have to understand how to keep my system alkaline. Now, acid alkaline lifestyle is what we're going to call this. It's not one of those, I guess, juicy topics. It's like, well, I don't really want to know that. Well, how about if we do this? Being acidic's the first step to premature aging. How's that? Being acidic's the first step toward wrinkles. How's that? Mm-hmm. How about it's the first step toward feeling tired, low energy, just don't feel quite right, agitated, anxious, aches and pains, bowel function disorders, diarrhea, constipation, bloating, eczema, psoriasis, acne, diabetes, COVID. How about if I say that? COVID, suffering a loss of libido, nauseous all the times, arthritis, fungal and bacterial infections, cancer. How about all that? How about if you look for one common thread that goes through virtually every single health condition that there is? And if you look at the problem with the standard American diet, that's it. It tends to get us acidic. So let's go through the slides, and then I have some really good takeaways on what we'll call food combining at the very end. So the first slide is basically what we're going to call this, the acid alkaline lifestyle simplified. You have to make sure that you understand that this becomes a lifestyle. It's not something you're going to do as a diet. I'm not going to do this for 2 or 3 weeks and then stop. Once you understand the principles of this, and you get yourself a roll of pH tape so that you can check your first morning urine, we'll go over that in a little bit, and you understand how certain things can affect your acid alkaline balance, once you get to that point, it will become a lifestyle change. So the next slide. That's just a little bit more about me. My main office is in Peachtree City, Georgia. I now live in Florida on the West Coast, and I'm back in Peachtree City about every 4 to 5 weeks. And virtually on this type of communication with my patients every day. And, if you want to look at the one benefit of COVID has been the dawn of Zoom and being able to do much more communication like this. Next slide, please. The acidic body. Most cancers propagate in an acidic environment. If I just stop right there and said, what scares most people the most, what really is tops on your list, it's called the C word. We can say, well, my parents had diabetes and my parents were overweight and, I'm tending on that. But if I said, what throws the fear of God in you the most, it's the C word. And if we understand that most cancers propagate in an acidic environment, would it not make sense to try to keep your body from becoming acidic? Point number 2, most viruses propagate in an acidic environment. We're talking, and I talked to Tracy before we went live about mask mandates and COVID and vaccines and you name it. It's become the hot topic. Our pastor preached on this from the book of Revelation this past Sunday about all the different signs and the ends of time and the things that are happening right now, well, this COVID thing has divided most families, has divided friends, has divided political parties. It's gone down the list. But if you want to do one basic thing to make your body less likely to be able to hold on to a virus, you become more alkaline. Our body lacks proper repair. You know, I play a lot of golf. I like to. And I tripped into a hole in the golf course on Friday, and I pulled a calf muscle. You know, and it was like I'm limping around here all weekend. But it's amazing that when you keep your body excessively alkaline, not excessively, but properly alkaline, your body starts to repair itself. The blood gets sticky in an acidic environment. You look at the risk factors of blood clots and strokes and Alzheimer's and all of the other factors that involved with sticky blood becomes a major problem. Cardiovascular disease, the number one killer in this country. Much more difficult to balance your blood sugar. Diabetes now affecting, or prediabetes, 3 out of every 4 Americans right now. That is a scary fact. And then again, what Tracy and I and a whole group of us put together way back in March, which was a 90-day program, which one of the goals was to solidify weight loss. It's much more difficult to lose weight when you're acidic. Your body just stays there. Next slide, please. Have you ever wondered what the acid alkaline lifestyle is and how it works? Have you ever wondered how the acid alkaline diet could be applied to your life but couldn't understand what it involves? It sounds a little bit overwhelming. So we put together some very simple ideas, a program that will help give you the exact understanding of what the alkaline diet really is. And if you're not taking notes right now, which I'd rather you just listen, at the end of this, if you want to call my office, we have copies of all these notes. We have a copy of a number of different booklets on the acid alkaline lifestyle, along with copies of charts and ideas on how to apply these lifestyle principles to yourself. So just for right now, sit back, relax, and listen. Next slide, please. I've been living and breathing and working in the alkaline lifestyle for 9 years now, since diagnosed with kidney cancer. I've lectured on it, and really, anytime anyone has sat down with me, anytime, from whatever the condition is, this is point one with me. Now, they call me the gut guy as well, because oftentimes when you see gut dysfunction, that's where the major problem is. So the value of having your system alkaline could save your life. That's quite a statement. You know, the FDA doesn't like us making claims, and I'm not making claims, but I'm just saying, in a point like this where people are not living, I don't know if you caught the news this morning, Tracy, but again, it was worldwide that they said, again, in 2021, the average male will not live as long as their father did. We've had a shortened lifespan now for 2020 and again in 2021, and everybody wants to point a finger at COVID as being one of the reasons. I don't think it's that. You know, I think there's a lot of other factors involved. The stress of COVID, perhaps, but I don't know, Trace, did you see that on the news? I mean,
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Len, I said this morning, like if this was such a deadly disease, people would be dying at home. They're not, they're dying in hospitals.
Right.
Second, you know, no more people have died this year than last year. So if we are really in a pandemic, then we would have more people that have died. The average age of death hasn't changed. And to say our life expectancy is going down, that's a hypothesis. I don't know if that's actually measurable yet. And it went down before COVID. I think the first time that was deemed that our life expectancy decreased was in 2017 or 18. That was the first time we saw that. And we weren't even hearing about this. So, you know, they can play on words all they want. You know, for people to really be informed today, you have to do your own research and turn off the idiot box, because it just makes you dumber. So that's my theory.
Don't live on Dr. Google. Exactly.
That's right.
Listen to shows like this every day. Thank you, Trace. Next slide, please. The acid alkaline diet simplified. What is it? It's a very simple, straightforward approach to health. Now, it's backed by much science. I mean, there's been research pieces that have been done, extensive science behind this, pioneered by the physicians and clinical pathologist Russell Jaffe. Now, Russ was a friend of mine and still is. I think he's semi-retired now, but he was one of my instructors when I went back to school to get my naturopathic degree. The fellow trained with a number of the researchers that worked on vitamin C back in the day. And he lived the alkaline lifestyle. That was part of his basic philosophy of keeping one young. So let's give it a little bit in scientific terms. Next slide, please. Our body's designed to be alkaline. The level of most of our important cellular and body fluids, such as our blood, is designed to be at a pH of 7.365, slightly alkaline. Now, you don't need to know that, but if we understand that neutrality is about pH of 7, and if you look at that chart that goes down to 5, which is extremely acidic, 6 is mostly acidic, 7 just approaching neutrality, 8 approaching alkalinity, and anything higher than 8 is excess alkalinity, and there's a problem on that side as well. In just the same way, our bodies will do whatever it takes to regulate our temperature to stay to a very small range. It does the same thing for the pH of our fluids. If you're listening right now and you're a postmenopausal female and you've been to your doctor, maybe your OB-GYN or your family doc, and he said, let's go do a bone density. We're going to find that the greatest percentage of women in the United States, excuse me, are now losing bone density. And is it because we're not consuming enough calcium? No, it's because our body, as God created it, knows that it can find a source of minerals in the body to try to keep us on the alkaline side. So it will try its best to be able to steal from Peter to pay Paul. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, your bones become the donation point. Next slide, please. While our body does create acids naturally through our bodily function, just the concept of consuming food, digesting food, assimilating it, and taking it to our cells to be burned to produce energy, the excessive acids that come off just the normal consumption of food and the normal burning of food in the mitochondria of our cells is acidic. So our body has to have a buffering system to try to keep us naturally alkaline. Your body must keep the pH of your blood, your cells, and other fluids on the just alkaline side. As I said, pH 7.365, and it'll do anything it has in order to maintain this pH balance. Next slide, please. To do this, your body calls upon its stores of alkaline buffers, which it draws upon to neutralize the acids we ingest or create through bodily processes. You know, I'm going to skip just for a second and tell you what's the average American diet. Red meat, potatoes. Red meat, potatoes, and maybe soda. 3 of the most acid-forming foods that are known to man. Now, does that mean that red meat is inherently bad for you? Not necessarily. But if we do consume red meat, there are ways to do food balancing and food combining to be able to offset the excessive acid that you would get from a small portion of red meat. This store of buffers is very easily depleted because most of us eat and drink strong acidic forming foods. Next slide, please. To put this in context, the pH scale is logarithmic, so a pH of 6. This is important. As I said, if you get a roll of human physiological pH tape, which is like a mustard yellow, and you start keeping a journal of your food intake, and each morning when you get up, not if you get up during the night, but each morning when you get up, your first morning urine You urinate on a piece of this pH tape, and it's going to change the coloring of that tape, which we want to see it go from this mustard orange to a deep blue. That says we're moving in the right scale. And the scale on the side of the little package will tell you where you are. But this is important because if you come in with a pH of 6, that's not bad, right? If 7 is where I want to go and I have a 6, that's not bad. That's 10 times more acidic than a pH of 7. Now, if you come in with a 5, which is the human physiological average pH, 5.5 is what most Americans are sitting at, is 100 times more acidic than a pH of 7. Now, we can't even measure down to a pH of 4, but that's 1,000 times more acidic. Cola. Still the number one food purchased in grocery stores. Again, cola has a pH between 2 and 3. So you can see how a diet filled with meats, dairy, fizzy drinks, alcohol, etc. will quickly deplete these buffers. And when we deplete these buffers and still ingest more acid, guess what's going to happen? Ill health will follow. Next slide, please. The body is forced to draw upon its alkaline mineral reserves to buffer or neutralize, which can cause havoc in the body. For instance, if the body is constantly drawing calcium to neutralize the acids we consume, then the symptoms of osteoporosis will emerge. As I said, almost every single postmenopausal woman who's been told for decades to consume 1,200 milligrams of calcium, and now we're saying, wait a minute, that's too much. Well, what do I have to do? Well, let's take some vitamin K, let's take some selenium, let's take some magnesium. We consume a whole lot of other things trying to get our bone density where it needs to be. And we do this for a year, and we go back to the doctor again, and he says, you're still losing bone density. And we do it for another year, and we're still losing bone density. And now the doctor wants to put you on an injectable drug called Prolia. Once a year, maybe once every 6 months, we'll get a shot. And we're going to stop the normal growth cycle of bone. But that'll fix your osteoporosis for you, right? But if we don't make these lifestyle changes, even with Prolia, you're going to be fighting a major battle. Recent research of articles linking cola consumption to osteoporosis is nothing new, and it's still there, and it's still a really, really big deal. Next slide. However, as we evolved and our diets and lifestyles have changed over the last century or so, we have dramatically increased the amount of acidity in our lives. Now, this next line is important. Diet, which we talked about, stress, emotions. Stress, emotions. Human physiological stress, whether it be emotional stress, physical stress, dietary stress, environmental stress, whatever our body is being exposed to on a regular basis will be a contributing factor and tends to make us become more acidic. I have had people chart out all of their food and they're eating an alkaline diet. And I still had this one day where my pH went from 7 down to 5 one morning. We said, what happened? Wow, I ate okay. What happened that day before? Well, I got a call from PNC Bank that my account was overdrawn. Or I got a call that my Aunt Sally passed away. And that emotional toll on the human body will tend to make you acidic, even though ideally just short term, but you got to understand that emotions and stress can affect you, as well as no exercise. God built us to move. Let me say that again. God built us to move, not to sit down and watch Netflix, not to sit down and do nothing. Get up and move. We walk, we run, we go to the gym, we work out, whatever level. God made you move. Get up and move, and you can help to reduce the acidity on your body. Next slide. Be no surprise to you learn that most acidic foods, look at this list: sugar, trans fats, yeast, dairy, simple carbs, alcohol, refined foods. Okay, parents, what are your teenagers eating? Oh, we don't have to worry about them being too acidic, do we? Really? I'm talking about lifestyle changes for a family. I'm not saying you can't have dairy every now and then. I'm not saying you can't have some carbohydrates occasionally. I'm not saying that you need to avoid Chick-fil-A and trans fats all the time. But you need to make the lifestyle change that says that's the exception to the rule rather than the rule itself. Next slide. These acids manifest in our diets: cola, fizzy drinks, pizza, number one consumed food in this country, chips, cakes, biscuits, microwave meals, crisps, breads, caffeine. That's the one that gets me. And I'm going to talk to you about caffeine and coffee in just a second. Cheese, fatty meats, ice cream, smoking, beer, wines, condiments, milky drinks, creams, etc. All the foods you already know are not good for you are also not good for you because they are acidic forming. Now, we know for a fact, I have lectured about the advantages of coffee, about the goodness that is in the right forms of coffee that's brewed correctly. No, I'm not talking about Starbucks where they burn everything. I'm talking about getting the right forms of coffee, an organic form of coffee, and brewing your coffee correctly. It still becomes an acidic medium. We understand that. But if you can produce your coffee using alkaline water, and perhaps if you're brewing it yourself, add a little chicory to the coffee blend itself, you can basically neutralize the excess acid and still have a good tasting cup of coffee. The 3 or 4 cups that I have a day, I try to keep it, and I make it with alkaline water, and I try to keep the pH of that coffee just shy of 7, which is not going to affect me over the long haul. Next slide, please. The Alkaline Way diet. I'm sure you can guess that foods that are alkaline for the body are there for the ones that are good for you. Fresh vegetables, salads, leafy greens, the good fats, the omega oils, nuts, seeds, pulses, whole grains. Fresh foods best, raw foods best, whole foods, foods with a high water content and nutritional value. I'm not talking about iceberg lettuce. It's not bad for you, just not nutrient dense. Spinach, kale, some of the deep greens, the leafy greens, all the good nuts. Remember, I don't know how many times we have to tell you, peanuts aren't included in that list. Other nuts, seeds, pulses, whole grains. Next slide. Makes this diet pretty easy to understand, pretty easy to follow, actually. I think most people have given a list of foods, could put them into the acid or alkaline group 8 times out of 10. Because you'll see if you follow any teaching whatsoever, and any dietary plan whatsoever, you will find that the greatest percentage of foods that are, quote, bad for you are bad for you because they're acid forming. I know they have excess calories. Yeah, I know all the other things that affect a diet. But they also become very acid forming as well. Next slide. So, what makes a food acid or alkaline? There are a few things, but the most recent and important rules are this. If a food is high in alkaline minerals, including magnesium, potassium, calcium, or sodium, it's likely to be alkaline to the body. And I know most of you are going to say, like, well, if I'm going to have navy beans, how do I know what the magnesium content is? Well, you can look that up. And it may take a little work at first to understand food combining and ways to actually look at foods to put them together. But again, it becomes a lifestyle. If you do need help with this, seek help. Find one of your counselors in the area. If you want to call my office, call my office. We'll be glad to get you some instructions on how to introduce this concept into your life. During this week at the Weiner Wellness Center, you're going to be hearing about a lot of different things, a lot of different supplements, all of them phenomenal, every single one of them. You know, if there's one company that produces quality from start to finish, it's Nutritional Frontiers. But if you're not going to deal with this issue, let me just say that again. If you're not going to deal with this issue and you're not going to get your pH correct and you're not going to live the alkaline lifestyle, you're going to take a lot of supplements and not get the advantages of them. Oh, you know, I'm taking GI Complete. Well, that's a good start. Oh, I'm also taking Super K2 Plus. Or how about this one? I'm taking my vitamin D. My vitamin D levels don't ever seem to get up. I take 5,000 IUs every day, but when my doctor tests me, I'm not really up there. You could be running interference by having an excessively acidic system. Next slide. Regardless of the alkaline mineral content it contains any of the following, then it'll become acidifying. Sugar. Now, I put it there and read articles about sugar. I was going to list some of them, but there's just too many of them. You can look this up yourself about the acid that comes from granulated sugar. You know, we stopped at a farmer's market yesterday where I bought some beefsteak tomatoes and some fresh produce. And every time you go to a farmer's market, they typically have this side where they're selling homemade jellies and jams. And, you know, you're naturally drawn there. They have all these cutesy little bottles and everything. And my wife wanted some cherry jam. And what I liked about this, it says, no granulated sugar added at all. The only sweetness that was put into this jar of jam was actually cherry juice. Now, did it have a caloric content to it? Sure it did. But it's produced in the right way by using the right forms of sugar to give you a food that still tastes good without having those excessive things added to it. Yeast. Just look at white bread. Look at some of the cookies and crackers and cakes. Fermented. Now, again, is it fermented too much? Now, there are exceptions to this rule. You know, when we look at soy and we look at some of the fermented forms of soy, which are actually very tasty, used in a lot of Japanese and Chinese cuisine, contains fungi like mushrooms. You know, a very common thing that a lot of restaurants place on top of red meat is refined, microwaved, or processed. So anything that you're buying in the store that is just a reheated meal, I think we all know that, is not only not going to be good for you, but it's also going to be extremely acid forming. Next slide, please. So this leads to some abnormalities. Fruit is generally, unfortunately, acidifying due to its high sugar content. Bananas, for example, are very high in potassium, but around 25% sugar. The only exceptions are tomatoes, avocados, lemons, and limes, great for dressings and flavorings. Grapefruit and watermelon, to some degree, which are alkaline because they are also so low in sugar. So again, there's nothing wrong with consuming strawberries, blueberries, etc. But if you're going to have them as the main source of your meal rather than combining, you're running the risk factors of excessively acidifying your diet. Next slide, please. Sugar is such an issue because when the blood deviates from its ideal pH of 7.365, then it causes major stress to the rest of the body. Remember, the body has to maintain this pH level and it'll go to extreme measures and sacrifice everything else to make sure it stays there. Have you had any blood work done recently? Has the doctor done a urinalysis on you? Pull the records out. Sure, they're looking for a lot of different things to show up in your urine. If you're diabetic, they're looking at a lot of different things. But one of the things that every single lab does is a urine pH. What's yours say? Should say 7.2 or greater. If it's not, you've got some work to do. Next slide, please. The alkaline way, the role of emotions, as I mentioned earlier, compounds the longer it goes on. Emotions, stress, and lack of exercise all contribute to this. Again, Dr. Jaffe has done research pieces galore on this. In fact, doing the analysis of live blood, that emotions can have twice as much an effect on our blood and health than any food can. Don't discount this. If you're dealing with something, whatever that is, seek good counsel. It's scriptural. Seek good counsel. If you're just mildly anxious at times, there are some wonderful preps like Calm Day. I can't tell you how many patients I have on that right now, that it's just changed their life, turned things around, just to help you balance and deal with. Adrenamax, if you're just completely adrenally blown out, you need to have a little bit of support to keep your energy up, keep your emotions strong. Exercise obviously is essential because it pumps our blood and lymph around the body to remove excess waste, which is primarily acidic. It helps to deliver oxygen to the cells necessary for functioning. Next slide. Summary. Our body's designed to stay alkaline and will do whatever it takes to do so. When we consume acidic foods and drinks, stop exercise, and continually have negative emotions, our body's overrun with acids, and this causes a major disruption. Next slide. Not surprisingly, the acid foods are the ones you already know are bad for you. Cola, chips, chocolate, sweets, burgers, dairy, beer, etc. And the alkaline foods are the ones you already know are good for you. Fresh foods, leafy green vegetables, salads, nuts, seeds, etc. Next slide. To become alkaline, you simply need to start focusing on 70 to 80% of your diet on the alkaline foods and trying to limit the acidic foods. Back this up with 3 to 4 liters of good quality, clean, filtered water each day. And again, there's limits to that. If you're having kidney issues, check with your physician about how much you can literally consume. Alkalize your water with baking soda and lemons. Again, we don't like tap water, obviously, and most filters are still delivering acidic water. There are alkaline machines available. There are alkaline water drip systems available. That's what I have in my office. But simply pulling maybe a quart of good filtered water, adding a tablespoon of baking soda and floating some lemons in there will help bring the pH of the water up into the alkaline range. Most tap water is a pH of 5. Next page. Step 1, eat a wide variety of fresh, higher quality foods, organic when you can. Important to make lifestyle changes for the entire family. I cannot tell you how often I deal with a wife that calls me, a husband that calls me, and they try to make changes. And then when I talk to them, they said, well, yep, I made the changes for me, but I got to cook 2 different things here because I got to do something for my kids. Why can't they eat the same way you do? It's a family thing. You know, and that's why I love watching Tracy when I see how she loves her family and how she loves what her kids do and the sports they're in and the meals that they consume. She's not making 2 different sets of food. She's making foods to balance it because it's a lifestyle for the entire family. Next slide. Step 2, 60 to 7% of your diet needs to be alkaline forming foods. If you're battling an illness, this may need to go closer to 100%. If you're healthy, whatever that definition is, we should stay at about 50% or better. Now I'm going to go back in time. Nearly 20 years ago, when I first started practicing, the first patient I had, now deceased, his name was Joe Meyer. He was a dear friend. He lived in the neighborhood when I had my pharmacy in Rochester, Pennsylvania. And Joe came to me with stage 4 prostate cancer. He was in his 60s at the time, late 60s. And he brought in all his slides, the ultrasounds, the biopsy reports, and he said, they want to remove my prostate gland. And I said, what do you want to do? He says, I don't want to do that. And I don't want to do chemo. I don't want to do. So I talked to him about alkalizing his diet. And for the next 20 years, Joe carried around with him everywhere he went a roll of pH tape. Every meal, if he ate out, he ate in. He checked his pH right after he ate. Joe never died of prostate cancer. Once a year, he would go in and have an ultrasound done. And they would see the cancer, and it wouldn't spread. His body, for 20 years, till his late 80s, managed to keep that cancer in check. Was he an exception to the rule? Perhaps. But the alkaline lifestyle kept him alive. Now, eventually, he had some cardiovascular issues and passed away near 90. But he lived a long, healthy life by living the alkaline lifestyle. Next slide. Get your food and allergy sensitivity testing done. A lot of practitioners now are doing food sensitivity testing, blood testing, IgG testing, to find out what you're basically sensitive to. It can help you follow the results to set a stage for what foods you can combine, what foods you can put together. Next slide. Step 4, eat a healthy ratio of food, 60% plant-based, complex carbs only, 60% of your intake, 20% protein, 20% good fats. I don't think that's anything new to most people, but it's the ratios that you've got to remember. Next slide. Step 5, fermented foods. And again, remember, I said up on the other slide, you got to be careful. Some fermented foods become excessively acidic, like a pickle. The value of probiotics for balancing the gut, sufficient dosage, making sure the gut is working, and what I feel is the most important starting place to get your body alkaline, going on GI Complete for at least 3 months. Once a day, sometimes twice a day if you're having any GI problems, and making sure that you give the body the healing nutrients it needs to keep the gut healthy. Next slide. In case you haven't seen GI Complete, it's my #1 selling product in my office. And the rave reviews that I get for this, for anybody that's suffering from any sorts of GI complaints, it's astronomical. Next slide. Probiotics. Nutritional Frontiers has a whole array from chewables with Enzymes, Frontier Biotics, and Superbiotics, all kind of different forms. And you got to make sure you're getting a sufficient dose, as I said there. Some individuals, 4 capsules a day. So those of you that are sitting back taking 1 a day thinking you're getting enough may not be enough. It all depends on how your body's responding. Next slide. Step 6, the value of proper hydration, having enough soluble fiber. Frontier Fiber is a phenomenal prep. It's now elevating itself into my top 5 most dispensed nutraceuticals right now. And there's also a prep called Rehydration Drops, which is a way to soften water. It's made by a company called Energetics. It's added to water without using sodium or potassium to soften the water so that you get better absorption of your liquids. Next slide. Frontier Fiber. Fabulous soluble fiber, goes crystal clear in water. Don't even know it's there. Next slide. Step 7, adding alkalizing minerals. Buffered vitamin C and digestive enzymes, which set the stage for you maximizing what you get out of your foods. And they call it buffered vitamin C because it is buffered to alkalinity. People say, well, how do you keep your system so alkaline? I dose myself between 4 and 6 grams a day based on what my morning pH is. It's not a tough thing to understand. Next slide. Enzymes, betazymes. And again, 2 really good digestive enzymes that can make a big difference in your digestive capacity. Oftentimes, if you're living on Prilosec, Nexium, Protonix, and you're suppressing the acid in your stomach, guess what? You're taking foods that may be inherently alkaline and changing them into a form where the absorption may make them acidic. So use of digestive enzymes is a crucial factor. Next slide. Buffered vitamin C, just a few of the attributes. Enhances hormone production, enhances your body's, keeping your body capable of adapting, helps to eliminate toxins, helps to promote proper energy production, helps to keep the bowels active, and it's a major source of alkalizing minerals. Comes in capsules, comes in liquid, comes in powder. Whatever way to fit your family's needs. Next slide. Buffered C+, there it is. A simple capsule, 120 capsules in the bottle. You know, I take anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 a day, depending, again, on the pH of my system. Next slide. All right, now I'm going to finish up with this. I'm going to give you some food combining ideas, and I have a chart which we will make available to you. And I'm just going to give you some ideas. The chart breaks every food group down into, on the left-hand side, all the acidic forms, on the right side, all the alkaline forms. And everything is assigned either a plus or a minus. Something has 4 pluses, you add a lot of it. 3 pluses, a good percentage of it. 2 pluses, moderate amount. 1 plus, a little bit. And then it's counterbalanced. So if you're consuming something, for instance, chicken, as good as it is for you, is 3 minuses, which means it's not super acidic, but it is acid forming. So if you move to the other side of the chart to the +3, if you combine that with kale, ginger, broccoli, garlic, parsnips, poppy seeds, cashews, kombucha, etc., and you combine it together and add with your dessert some grapefruit, cantaloupe, honeydew, olives, mango, citrus, or loganberry, guess what? It becomes a pH neutral food. And it goes down this list. The most acid forming foods: soybeans, barley, pheasant, beef, shellfish, lobsters, ice cream, cheese, hazelnuts, walnuts, and Brazil nuts. So even in the nut family, some nuts become extremely acidic. Beer, extremely acidic. Puddings, jams, and jellies, extremely acidic. This chart, which again, if you want to call my office, I'll be glad to get to you, can easily make things feel better for you as far as food combining. Let me just finish up with this. If we look at acidosis, I'm just going to give you a summary statement. Acidosis disrupts the insulin-producing pancreatic beta cells. Acidosis disrupts the body's capability of producing insulin. The beta cells are especially sensitive to pH and cannot survive if the body's too acidic. You're moving toward diabetes. Number 2, being acidic accelerates free radical damage and premature aging. It leads to partial lipid breakdown and destructive oxidative cascades. Number 3, it disrupts lipid and fatty acid metabolism. All of a sudden, you'll see your cholesterol and your LDL cholesterol go up. Acidic pH can accelerate the development of atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, can exaggerate an aneurysm, arrhythmias, myocardial infarcts, strokes. Some diseases associated with acidosis. You know, as I said, osteoporosis comes to mind as probably the most. So why is this also? The reason is simple. Without oxygen, glucose undergoing fermentation becomes lactic acid. This causes the pH of the cells to drop to 7. In more advanced cancer cases, the pH level falls further to 6.5. Sometimes the level can drop to 6 or 5, 7 or lower. Basic truth is our bodies simply cannot fight disease if our pH is not properly balanced. Long-term effects can affect your structure of your body with your bones, your nervous system. When brain cells are too acidic, they don't function correctly. Circulatory system. Again, during conditions of excess acidity, bacteria, fungi, and viruses attach themselves to the inner wall of our arteries and spread. Our digestive system goes off kilter. Our intestinal system runs into problems, colon dysfunction. Our immune system, our immune cells that are too acidic do not produce antibodies or cytokines. So if you're too acidic, even the vaccine isn't going to help you. Respiratory system, the binding of oxygen to hemoglobin in the lungs operates in a fairly narrow pH range. Urinary system. You're waking up, guys, to urinate during the night? Probably too acidic. Glandular systems. All the endocrine glands produce hormones through an enzymatic action. If the pH is too acidic, cannot produce or release sufficient hormones for the body's needs. And lastly, weight loss. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's virtually impossible if you're running too acidic. Now, this isn't called fear mongering. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm saying understand getting all the information when you see your physician, getting your blood work done, staying healthy, exercising, eating properly. But for God's sake, check yourself, check your pH on a regular basis, and make sure that you are starting to initialize toward alkalizing your system, and make sure you're doing it for the whole family. It could save your life and keep you healthy. Only God knows how long you're going to be here on the face of the earth. But you want to make sure that you maximize that time you're here. He has a role for you while you're here to share the stories, to share the gospel. But you got to stay healthy in order to do it. Tracy, that's a 3-hour lecture in 45 minutes.
And that's a wrap, huh? Awesome. I'm just going to look through the chat box real quick. Yeah, mushrooms, surprising. That is surprising. So can you touch on that a little bit with the fungus when you were saying about the mushrooms?
It varies on how they're actually cooked. So once again, you know, when you see mushrooms that are just slightly sauteed and then put into a heavy gravy, that tends to make them excessively acidic. Okay, so a mushroom will take up its environment. If you're just getting raw mushrooms, chopping them up and maybe saute them with a little olive oil, they can be fine. But most times when you go to a restaurant, you find them just inundated in a gravy or put into another medium to put them on, and that ends up becoming a major problem.
What do you think about mushrooms and supplementation? Different?
I think it is. I think mushrooms, you know, all the different mushrooms that are immune builders, they are fabulous. There's a lot of them out there.
So they're in their natural state, so they haven't been altered through oxidative stress.
And in their natural state, before they've been manipulated, they can become very, very good for you in those states.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Len. Always awesome to have you here.
And again, the number at my office, if you want a copy of that booklet we have, it's about a 60-page booklet, and we can actually link it and email it to you. I just downloaded it. So it explains the entire process from start to finish. And it'd be a nice little guidepost for anybody to have on hand.
Yes.
Just to be able to institute some concepts back into your family.
Absolutely. So thenutritionshop.net.
.net. Very good.
2 P's.
678-228-8900.
Awesome. Get in touch with Dr. Len. This video will be available to watch over and over again, which I think would be great. And stay tuned for our next speaker, who is Jamie Dorley, coming up. New innovations in nutraceuticals, SPMs, one of my favorites.
Thanks, Trace.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody, stay tuned for the Weiner Wellness Virtual Summit and Week, continuing till 1 o'clock today. Jamie is next. Stop in and see everybody at the Weiner Wellness Center or call in your orders. They are waiting for you. If you need anything, deep discounts available all week. All right, guys, stay tuned.